Sarah had never thought much about investing. She was too busy surviving. As a single mother of 2 kids, ages 7 and 9, working double shifts as a medical assistant in Pasadena, the concept of having extra money to invest felt like a luxury for other people. People who didn't live paycheck to paycheck. People who didn't have to choose between new shoes for their growing kids and paying the electric bill on time. After her brother David died 18 months ago, she'd moved into his small house in Altadena. Calling it a house was generous. It was really more of a dilapidated bungalow with a sagging roof, outdated electrical wiring, and plumbing that made concerning noises at 2 in the morning. But it was free, and free was all Sarah could afford. David had been an investigative journalist covering cartel activity in South America. He'd been killed in Colombia under circumstances that were never fully explained to the family. The official report said it was a car accident on a mountain road. His editor had hinted it might have been something else. Either way, David was gone at 34 years old, and Sarah inherited a house she couldn't afford to fix and questions she'd never get answered. She thought about investing sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep. She'd read articles online about index funds and Roth IRAs and compound interest, but it all felt impossibly distant. You needed money to make money, and she had none to spare. Still, she worried about her kids' futures. Would they be able to go to college? Would they spend their entire lives struggling the way she had? David used to tell her that knowledge was wealth, that understanding how money worked was the first step to having it. She wished she'd listened more carefully when he tried to explain it to her. Then came January 7th. The Altadena fires started in the early morning hours, driven by Santa Ana winds that turned the dry hillsides into a tinderbox. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of sirens. By the time she got her kids out of the house and into her car, flames were visible on the ridgeline above them. They evacuated with 1 suitcase, 2 scared children, and the family photo album she grabbed on her way out the door. Everything else burned. She stood behind the police barricade 3 days later and watched what was left of David's house smolder. The roof had collapsed entirely. The walls were blackened shells. Everything she owned, every memory of her brother that hadn't been in that photo album, was ash. Her kids cried. She couldn't. She felt completely numb, completely helpless. They'd been staying with her friend Jennifer, sleeping on an air mattress in a living room, and Sarah had no idea what came next. The house had been paid off, but David had let the homeowner's insurance lapse 6 months before he died. There would be no payout, no way to rebuild. She'd lost everything and gained nothing but a lot full of debris. The fire inspector cleared the property after a week. Sarah returned alone, leaving the kids with Jennifer, because she couldn't bear for them to see the devastation up close. She wore thick gloves and borrowed boots, planning to see if anything at all had survived. Maybe David's filing cabinet with important documents. Maybe her grandmother's jewelry box that had been in the bedroom closet. Anything. The smell was overwhelming. Wet ash, burned plastic, and something else she couldn't identify. She picked through what used to be the living room, then the kitchen, finding nothing but melted appliances and charred wood. In what had been David's bedroom, she found the metal frame of his bed and the remains of his desk. And then, in the corner where his closet used to be, she saw something that made her stomach turn. At first, she thought it was a skull. It was roughly the right size and shape, blackened and partially melted, with hollow spaces that could have been eye sockets. Sarah stumbled backward, her hand over her mouth. Had someone died in the fire? Had she missed something in the evacuation? She pulled out her phone to call the police, then stopped. Something about it didn't look quite right. The texture was wrong. The weight, when she carefully picked it up with a stick, was far too heavy to be bone. She crouched down and looked more carefully. It wasn't a skull. It was metal, gold maybe, that had partially melted in the intense heat of the fire. And it wasn't just a shapeless lump. She could make out features. A face, stylized and geometric, with an elaborate headdress. Her heart started pounding. This was pre-Columbian. This was an artifact, and based on the weight and the gold color, it might be real gold. David had been in South America for 3 years. He'd been investigating drug trafficking, illegal mining, and the black market in stolen cultural artifacts. She'd always assumed he was just reporting on it. What if he'd been doing something else? What if he'd been collecting these things himself? Sarah spent the next 4 hours searching through the ashes with new purpose. She found 3 more pieces. A small figurine with one arm melted off. A pendant with intricate designs barely visible through the fire damage. And a flat piece that might have been a decorative plate or mask. Each one was heavy. Each one appeared to be gold. In what used to be David's home office, she found the metal filing cabinet. It had survived, though the paint was burned off and the papers inside were partly charred. She pulled out folders carefully. Bank statements. Legal documents. And then, a waterproof bag sealed with duct tape. Inside was a USB drive and a letter in David's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before his death. The letter started with, "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead." Sarah's hands shook as she read. David explained that he'd been working on an exposé about artifact smuggling, but in the process, he'd made a decision that haunted him. A village in the Colombian mountains was being terrorized by a cartel that was looting their ancestral burial sites and selling everything valuable. The villagers were too scared to go to authorities who were likely paid off anyway. David had helped them hide the most valuable pieces, planning to eventually work with international authorities to return them properly. But then the cartel found out. The car accident wasn't an accident. David knew they were coming for him. The letter continued. He documented everything on the USB drive, locations, photographs, provenance research. He'd also taken some of the artifacts back to the United States, not to sell them, but to keep them safe until he could find the right people to handle proper repatriation. The pieces were worth a fortune, over $10 million if sold illegally, but that wasn't the point. The point was getting them back to their rightful owners or at least into proper museums. Then came the part that changed everything. David had other money, legitimate money from his journalism work and some savvy investments he'd made years ago in cryptocurrency and tech stocks. He'd been living like he was broke, saving everything, investing everything, because he planned to retire early and maybe start a family. That money was in accounts he'd set up with Sarah as the beneficiary. There was a detailed list of account numbers, passwords, and instructions. The letter ended with, "Take care of yourself and those kids. Make the money work for you. Don't work for the money. I love you." Sarah sat in the ashes of her brother's house and cried for the first time since the fire. Not from grief this time, but from the overwhelming complexity of what she'd just inherited. Stolen artifacts that needed to be returned, potential danger from people who might still want them, and apparently a substantial amount of legitimate money that could change her life. She had no idea what to do. She started with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in cultural heritage law and international repatriation. His name was Robert, and his office was in downtown Los Angeles. Sarah brought everything, the artifacts, the USB drive, the letter, the account information. She laid it all out and asked him to tell her the truth. Was she holding stolen property? Was she going to jail? Could any of this actually help her family? Robert studied everything for 3 days, consulted with experts, and finally called her back to his office. The news was complicated but not all bad. The artifacts were real, pre-Columbian gold pieces from the Muisca culture of Colombia, each between 500 and 1,000 years old. They absolutely needed to be returned, and there was a proper legal process for doing so through the Colombian embassy and international heritage organizations. Sarah would not face charges because she'd come forward immediately and her brother's documentation proved he'd been protecting them, not selling them. As for the financial accounts, those were completely legitimate. Robert had verified everything. David had been remarkably smart with money. He'd invested early in Bitcoin and Ethereum back in 2014 when they were cheap. He'd bought stock in a small tech company that later got acquired by Google. He'd maxed out retirement accounts and put money into diversified index funds. The total amount, as of that morning, was $14.6 million. It was all in Sarah's name now. It was all legally hers. Sarah couldn't process it. She'd been struggling to pay for groceries last week. Now she was a multimillionaire. But she was also terrified. She had no idea how to manage that kind of money. What if she made stupid decisions and lost it all? What if someone found out and tried to rob her or worse? What if the cartel that killed David came looking for the artifacts? Robert referred her to two people. First, a security consultant who helped her set up proper protections, new accounts, privacy measures, and a plan for staying safe during the artifact repatriation process. Second, a financial advisor named Patricia who specialized in helping people who'd come into sudden wealth. Patricia told Sarah something that would change how she thought about money forever. "You don't need to invest this money," Patricia said at their first meeting. "It's already invested. What you need to learn is how to live on the returns without touching the principal." At $14.6 million, invested conservatively in a mix of dividend-paying stocks, bonds, and index funds, you should be able to safely withdraw 4 to 5% per year without depleting the capital. That's between $580,000 and $730,000 annually. Before taxes, you're looking at roughly $40,000 to $50,000 a month in income, indefinitely, without ever working another day. Sarah stared at her. "That can't be real." "It's completely real," Patricia said. "This is how wealthy people stay wealthy. They live off the interest and returns, not the principal. Your brother did something remarkable. He built you a money machine. Now you just need to learn how to use it." Over the next 3 months, Sarah's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. The artifacts were formally returned to Colombia in a ceremony attended by embassy officials and representatives from the Muisca communities. The Colombian government, grateful for the return and aware of David's role in protecting the pieces, issued a formal thank you and cleared any potential legal issues. The cartel connection was investigated by international authorities, and while Sarah had to give several depositions, she was never in danger. David's final story, published posthumously with Sarah's permission, won an award and brought attention to the ongoing crisis of cultural heritage looting. Patricia restructured Sarah's investments, moving everything into a balanced portfolio designed for long-term growth and steady income. She taught Sarah the basics of compound interest, asset allocation, and tax-efficient withdrawal strategies. For the first time in her life, Sarah understood what David had tried to tell her. Money wasn't mysterious. It was a tool, and like any tool, it could be used well or poorly. With stable income and no more need to work, Sarah started thinking about what kind of life she wanted to build for her kids. Los Angeles had too many memories, too much pain associated with loss. She wanted space, clean air, and a slower pace. She started looking at property in the Midwest, places where land was affordable and communities were strong. She found a 200-acre plot in rural Nebraska, rolling hills with a creek running through it, just outside a small town with good schools. The entire property cost less than a small condo would have in Los Angeles. She hired an architect to help design not just a house, but a compound, a main residence for her family, generous and comfortable but not ostentatious. And then, scattered across the property, 5 small guest cottages, each one unique, that could be rented out as vacation rentals. The income from those, Patricia explained, could cover property taxes, maintenance, and even provide college funds for the kids. It was another layer of financial security. The architect's name was Tom. He was in his early 40s, a widower with 2 teenage daughters, and he'd moved back to Nebraska from Chicago after his wife died to be closer to his aging parents. He listened to Sarah's vision, her desire for a home that felt warm but also served a purpose, and he came back with designs that took her breath away. The main house had huge windows overlooking the property, an open kitchen perfect for family dinners, and a library because Sarah had promised herself that her kids would grow up surrounded by books. The guest cottages were charming and distinct, a modern minimalist cabin, a restored vintage airstream, a tiny house with a green roof, a rustic barn conversion, and a glass-walled studio perfect for artists or writers. As they worked together over the following months, walking the property and refining plans, Sarah realized she was falling in love. It happened slowly, in small moments. Tom's patience with her kids when they interrupted meetings to show him frogs they'd caught in the creek. The way he listened when she talked about David and didn't try to fix her grief, just held space for it. How he designed a special reading nook in the house without her asking, because he'd noticed how much she loved to read. They started having dinners together, first to discuss the project, then just because they enjoyed each other's company. Construction took 18 months. Sarah and the kids lived in town during the build, renting a small farmhouse and settling into the rhythm of rural life. The kids thrived, running around outside, joining local sports teams, making friends. Sarah volunteered at the library and got to know her neighbors. It was a life she'd never imagined for herself, quiet and slow and profoundly peaceful. When the property was finally finished, it was more beautiful than she'd dreamed. The main house felt like a home from the moment they moved in. The guest cottages started booking immediately, first through Airbnb and VRBO, then through word of mouth as guests told their friends about the gorgeous retreat in the Nebraska hills. Within 6 months, the cottages were generating $15,000 a month, more than enough to cover all expenses and fund the college savings accounts Patricia helped her set up for the kids. Tom was there on moving day, helping carry boxes and hanging pictures. He'd become part of their lives, his daughter's friends with Sarah's kids, his parents treating Sarah like family. One evening, after the kids were all asleep and they were sitting on the porch watching fireflies, Tom took her hand and asked if he could kiss her. She said yes. They got married a year later in the meadow behind the main house, a small ceremony with family and close friends. His daughters and her kids stood up with them. It felt right in a way Sarah hadn't thought was possible anymore. 2 broken families becoming one whole one, built on a foundation of shared loss and hard-won joy. Sarah thinks about David constantly, about the dangerous work that killed him, about the conscience that made him protect artifacts instead of profiting from them, about the financial discipline that gave her this life. She wishes he could see her kids now, confident and curious and free from the financial anxiety that defined her own childhood. She wishes he could meet Tom, who reminds her of David sometimes in his quiet integrity. She wishes she could thank him for teaching her, even posthumously, that investing wasn't about being rich, it was about building security and freedom. The kids travel now, taking trips funded by the cottage income. They've been to art museums in Chicago, national parks in Montana, historical sites in Boston. They talk about college without the fear Sarah had at their age that it might be impossible. They're learning that money is a tool, not a source of stress or shame, and that knowledge is the gift David really left them. Sometimes Sarah walks out to the spot where the first cottage sits and thinks about the artifacts she found in the ashes. How something that looked disturbing and wrong at first glance turned out to be the key to everything. How her brother's complicated legacy, part journalist, part protector of stolen culture, part savvy investor, gave her family a future she never could have built alone. How the worst day of her life, losing everything in the fire, was also the beginning of finding more than she knew existed. She never has to work another day in her life. Neither will her children, if they choose not to. But Patricia taught her that's not really the point. The point is having the freedom to choose, to do work that matters rather than work that just pays bills, to live intentionally rather than desperately. That's what David gave her. Not wealth, but choice. And she's choosing this life, this land, this man who designed her dream and became part of it. She's choosing to teach her kids what David tried to teach her, that understanding money is understanding freedom, and that the best investments are the ones that let you live the life you actually want. Every single day, she's grateful for what she found in the ashes. Not just the gold, but the knowledge that sometimes the most disturbing discoveries lead to the most beautiful transformations. Retry. Please like and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to never miss our newest story. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and what your favorite part of the story was. Thanks and see you here soon.